My book is The Chosen by Chaim Potok. And I chose a quote from near the end of this. It says, "I learned a long time ago that a blink of an eye in itself is nothing. But the eye that blinks, that is something. A span of life is nothing. But a man who lives that span, he is something. He can fill that tiny span with meaning, so its quality is immeasurable, though its quantity may be insignificant. A man must fill his life with meaning. Meaning is not automatically given to life." And one of the reasons that I love this is because so many times we're caught up in the big impact that somebody will make on the world itself, but understanding the value that somebody can make in their small area, in their own way of existing, in their own life themselves, and the people who are closest in their circle of influence can be just as valuable as great, big, huge events. They just don't get talked about as much.
All right, my quote is from a young adult book called Beyonders by Brandon Mull. It says, "A hero is true to his or her conscience. A hero sacrifices for the greater good. In short, heroism means doing the right thing regardless of the consequences. Although any person could fit that description, very few do. Choose this day to be one of them." I've always liked young adult and children's books because they have very true to life stories and morals in them. And this one about heroism is really neat because you don't really picture people as heroes in a day-to-day life, but they can be as long as they choose the right thing and do what their conscience tells them.
In Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, she writes, "Life appears to me too short to be spent in nursing amnosity or registering wrongs." And I like this quote because it talks about the idea of grudges and forgiveness and what the effect it has on our lives. Throughout a lifetime, man only lives about 80 or 90 years. And a lot of times, if you have harbor resentment against someone, it doesn't last just for a short period of time, it lasts for a long period of time, affecting your life and your relationships with other people, and specifically your family and friends, when really in life it should be more about love and your relationships with others. So that's what I like about this quote about nursing amnosity and registering wrongs, is that life is too short to be sad. Be happy.
My quote comes from Cormac McCarthy's National Book Award-winning All the Pretty Horses, first of the Border trilogy. And in it, a young man is having a conversation with an elder Mexican lady landowner, and she is talking about truth. And she says, "Because the question for me was always whether that shape we see in our lives was there from the beginning, or whether these random events are only called a pattern after the fact." She goes on then to talk to this young boy. He's about 15, 16 years old, about whether he believes in fate or not, or whether or not fate shapes destiny. And it seemed like a really good way to talk about truth, because what's real and what's out there connected to our actions and outcomes, I think, is the first time I remember as a young man ever thinking about whether or not there's something true. Am I supposed to be doing what I'm doing, or am I just doing something? And as someone educated by Jesuits and raised in that tradition, those are really legitimate questions for a young person to contend with.
The book that I decided to quote from is written by an author, one of my favorite authors, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The quote that I think represents an important element of truth comes from a short novel of his called No One Writes to the Colonel. The quote is this: the character, the Colonel, is speaking to his wife, and he says, "I understand," he said sadly, "the worst of a bad situation is that it makes us tell lies." I was drawn to this quote about the idea of a lie. I think that our ability to embrace the truth and to accept the truth and to live by the truth is so important that anytime that truth is compromised in our life, we have a moment or the opportunity to move backward, to retrogress in our life. I think that Marquez is telling us in this situation that when we forthwith, when we're not authentic about who we are or about the things that we do, we create an even worse situation than we would otherwise have.
I love this project, Novel Truth. It takes me back to my favorite classic, or one of my favorite classics, which is Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. And his quote that is such, for me, a visual imagery of the father of lies, of the ultimate battle, of, that pursuit of righteousness versus evil. And I think in just this one paragraph in The Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne really gets it right. With a wild look of wonder, joy, and horror, with what a ghastly rapture, as it were too mighty to be expressed only by the eye and features, and therefore bursting forth through the whole ugliness of this figure, making itself even riotously manifest by the extravagant gestures with which he threw up his arms toward the ceiling, stamped his foot upon the floor. Had a man seen old Roger Chillingworth at that moment of his ecstasy, he would have had no need to ask how Satan comports himself. I mean, how and why was Hawthorne able to describe this with such precision and passion? I think it's because his own family tree, his own ancestry was stained with sin. He was ashamed of Judge Hawthorne's role on the Salem witch trials, and he wished to cleanse it. And he was going to cleanse his family tree by writing this great, great novel.